Chris Worley has been a long-term member of our faculty as well, and of our staff at Center for Effective Organization as a researcher in both strategy and organization, and he will be one of the 3 faculty members as well, and will be with us the week after next. Beth, you want to say a little bit about yourself before we start through the material?
Yep, so my name is Beth Gunderson, and I have been a friend of the Center for over a decade and have worked closely with Sue and Chris, and now have the honor, having left a 32-year career in the food industry, of joining Sue and Chris and partnering with them on the course. So I am not only a follower of org design and a studier of the topic, but I'm also a practitioner. So I kind of round out the academic side that Sue and Chris bring. I will bring how do you actually apply this within organizations.
And Beth has probably understates her familiarity with the science of all this, because she's been an extraordinary student and also creator of understanding of how you design organizations. So we are actually thrilled that in the last 3 years she has joined our faculty and will continue to be a member of our faculty, and you're going to really enjoy dealing with her. Okay, so our purpose in this webinar is to sort of prepare you for what this course is going to be all about, how it's going to unfold. Make sure that we answer any questions that you have in advance of the workshop. It's a very intense 3.5-day process, and so the more you think about it in advance and the more you arrive knowing what you'd like to get out of it, the better. While we go through this, Beth is going to be both contributing as well as sort of tracking the comments in the chat box. So if you have comments that at the time that you'd like us to address, please put them in. When we look at what designing organizations is, it is the process by which people purposefully configure the elements of the organization to achieve the business outcomes, the customer outcomes, the employee outcomes, and societal outcomes. And this is a science that has emerged as organizations have been changing rapidly. At the beginning, organizations had a few key principles, such as how you set up a production process and how you do the administrative piece of an organization. And it has really evolved to become hugely complex as organizations have multiple business units, as they operate in many, many different countries, as they deliver a value to lots of different stakeholders. And organizations have had to, first of all, seriously consider who their customer is and what value they need to deliver to the customer. Secondly, what their employees need to know, and that changes through time. And so how do you create a group of employees that can keep up with the changes in organizations and can deliver value and are motivated to do so? And then the societal outcomes, as more and more stakeholders, such as the sustainability folk and the social responsibility folk and the environmental economic sort of watchdogs who are trying to make sure that the economy actually meets the needs of the population. All of those regulative kinds of forces, as well as market and resource forces, have really become key players in how organizations have to design and how they have to function. This has made the process of designing the organization a much more complex process. If you look at the next slide, it is Jay Galbraith's model. We've adapted it a little bit. Over his career, he actually had about 16 versions of this model, but these really are the key pieces that kept appearing over and over again. And it is a systems framework, and it basically says that as we design an organization, we have to know not only does it have these different masters, these different outcomes, the shareholders and the employees and the regulators and so forth, but it also has a number of different components that have to sing together, if you will. They will have to fit with each other and they have to fit with each other in a way that supports the strategy and what the organization is trying to accomplish. And it would be nice to say that we could give HR the responsibility for people, and we could give the strategy organization the responsibility for strategy, and we could give the finance people the responsibility for measurement and feedback. And in fact, for a long time, we had organizations that could do that. But what we have found in the last 8 to 10 years especially is that if those pieces don't support each other, an organization can really not make the kind of transformation and strategic change it needs to in order to perform well in today's environment. You really have to look at the parts of the system and how they all fit together. So we're going to, I'm going to go quickly through this model, this framework of organization. And the way to think about the course is that we're going to talk about all of these, but as we talk about them, we're going to talk about how they fit with each other, and especially how they fit with that purple box at the top, the strategy of the organization, which defines what the organization is trying to accomplish. So this is the framework. I'm going to go through it fairly quickly right now. Beth will add in, and we will spend some time the first morning really talking about the nuances of how these pieces have to fit together. Anything you want to add there, Beth, as a framing to this?
No, I think one of the operative words that Sue used was systems. And I think so often as we sit inside organizations and we get asked to do org design, many times we're approached by leaders and they go right to structure. Because that's really the only muscle that they have strengthened over the course of their career. And so I think our job as designers is to think more holistically and think of it as a system. And so as Sue walks through these, while we walk through them in a fairly linear way, these all have to, I like the way Sue put it, they all have to sing together. So like I said, we'll go through that somewhat linearly, but there are so much, and that's as you see the lines going across and creating the star, these things are all interconnected. So your job is to help influence within your organization that org design is not just structure, but there's many other pieces that must be taken into consideration.
Okay, so if we start with the strategy piece, the strategy is it's the goals and what the mission of the organization is and what it's trying to accomplish in its particular market environment. And strategy, we'll make the argument, and Chris will be talking about this in some detail and is quite an expert in it. Strategy can be at multiple levels. So your organization has a strategy, but actually each of the businesses in the organization, if there are multiple businesses, probably has a strategy of its own. Large programs, there are going to be a number of people from aerospace and defense kinds of firms where their programs are big enough to be their own corporation, and they probably have their own strategy as well. Each of the functions that supports an organization has to have a strategy for how it's going to use its resources to contribute to the overarching strategy of the company. So no matter what level you're designing at, you have to think about what is the strategy of the larger organization and what is the strategy of the unit that you're helping redesign. One of the questions we often get from people on this call, but also during the course, is the framework you teach useful if what we're designing is a function, we're designing finance, or we're designing IT, or what we're designing is a country organization, or any other, a particular product organization, any other of the subsystems of the larger corporation? And the answer to that is yes, they all have these elements in the figure on the right, and they all have to think about those elements. So if you're designing an HR function or a finance function, your people issues are the same generically, but the solutions that you will come up with for how you keep people up to date and how you make sure they're able to do their job and how effectively, and how you make sure that they're motivated to do their job effectively, the solutions, particular solutions, will depend on the work you do and what is the strategy of that particular unit in the corporation and what value has to be delivered to the corporation by that unit. So think of strategy as how are we going to deliver value to our selected market environment. And for a function, the value has to be delivered to the larger corporation. For a product line, it has to be delivered to the customers who are purchasing that product. And so that thinking is the same, no matter what size or scope of the organizational unit you're dealing with. We have added to the strategy component the notion of business model, which is becoming really, really critical in today's world, largely because of the rapid onset of technology advances. And they have made different business models possible. And what is a business model? A business model is the company's strategy, if you will, plan for how it's going to generate revenue, what value it's going to deliver that will generate revenue, and then in addition to that, how it's going to deliver the value to customers to continue to provide the input revenue and the input resources that are necessary to function. So it's how do we deliver value and how do we make sure we derive value from it. And that's really become critical, and we're going to talk a lot about this in this course as companies are using technology more and more fundamentally to enable the way that they work, because technology makes possible different kinds of business models. And just as an example of that, when globalization occurred, new business models were put in place simply because with technology you could do 24/7 work, and you could communicate. As we are right now, we're talking to somebody in Saudi Arabia at the same time that I'm having my first cup of coffee in California. That's all made possible by technology, and so are new business models. So Chris will be spending quite a little bit of time talking about how business models are changing and how a key part of the strategy element of this STAR is making sure you know what value you deliver and how you are organized to retrieve revenue from that value.
And Sue, I want to add to that. I'm also seeing, and you can chime in on this, is you talked about this model being applicable not just for overarching organizations but for functions. And what I'm even seeing is that the functions are defining their strategy and then from that deriving their operating model, which would be, I think, similar to, as you're talking about, an overarching business model. I see functions now being very clear and articulate about what their operating model is for that function, and that in turn is what's the value that they're bringing to the organization by the sheer fact of how they operate as a function.
Yeah. And you may say, what does all this have to do with org design? And if you look at Jay's chart and the models and frameworks we're going to use in addition to this one, it has everything to do with it, because simply put, if you don't know where you're headed, what the business model and strategy is, and if that isn't agreed to in the organization, then you can put in place any organization you want to. You can put in any model you want to, because you don't have a destination. So you'll get where you get to, but you won't necessarily get anywhere that creates a thriving organizational enterprise. So we really spend a lot of time saying it's really important you know where you're headed if you want to design an organization to get there. And again, to use the aerospace example, if you were designing an airplane that was going to Mars, and if you were designing an airplane that was going to fly from LA to London or to New York, you would use the same principles of design, but you would have a completely different strategy for that particular aircraft. It would be being designed to do different things. Organizations are designed to do different things, and that's what they are designed to do is determined by their strategy. So one of the issues that we'll talk about when we get to the management process piece of the STAR has to do with strategy, and that is, do people even know what that strategy is? And that's part of what you have to design in is a strategizing process in the organization and a strategy communication process. Okay, so the first thing you have to do once you know where you're headed is you have to say, what do we need to be able to do to get there? And that's your capabilities and your work processes. And at this point, what I'd like to do is point out something about this model and about these slides that we're going to emphasize, and that is that there is a very important diagnostic process that starts your designing process with your clients. And that is answering questions about, is there a strategy? What are the capabilities? Are we designed to accomplish the capabilities we need to accomplish? Do we have really high-quality work processes around the key things we need to do to deliver value to our relevant market space? If we have a strategy that says we're going to introduce continuous new products, do we have the work processes in place to continually innovate, as one example? And so we're going to talk about how you identify those capabilities and the work processes that underlie them, and we're going to talk about how then that leads into what most people think of as design, which is the structural piece of the organization. Before we ever get to structure, we'll talk about what does the structure have to support, what activities, what capabilities. And on the left side of each of these slides that are here and that you received also in your pre-work are the diagnostic questions that you would ask about your system. And we hope that you will take the time to do that. You've received a little workbook that you will take the time to think about the system that you're currently thinking about redesigning in terms of these diagnostic questions. One of the things you want to do when you diagnose is you want to get people in the organization to identify what are the core capabilities. For instance, on this point around the star, when we get to core and lateral structure, you'll want to get people to diagnose what are right now are our core structures and how do we connect and is it working well, and so on around the star. So for each point of the star, you get a starting point for your design process. And so we've sent that little workbook out in order to sort of set the rhythm and get you thinking already about these elements for your organization. Okay, so then we go to the structure, and as we know, as all of you know, and still some of you may feel the pain of this, structure is often accomplished by managers who sit in a restaurant and have a napkin and draw a picture of lines and boxes and then tell their design consultants what they want to put in place. It was so common when we started with our design processes, and still to a great extent symbolically or metaphorically describes what goes on in a lot of organizations. But what we advocate is that once you know what you have to be able to do and where you're headed, then you can identify what the core structures of the organization are, and then how you connect the lateral structures, how you connect across those core units. And we want you to leave the course really understanding the different kinds of core structures you can design and the different kinds of connective approaches you can take to making sure the parts of the organization operate well together. Okay. Beth, anything at this point before we go to the process pieces?
I would just say I think very often we focus solely on the core structure, and we quickly want to get that in place, so the lines and boxes and the people comes quite quickly after that. What you'll hear Sue talk a lot about when we get to the structure section is that a good design is first off done around what does the organization need to be able to do, and so that defines the actual structure. You hold off on the people side until you define what that structure is. And as I said, many times the organization stops there, and what you'll hear us talk a lot about is the importance of lateral. And the way I look at it is once you have the structure in place, the hard work really starts, and that is how do you stitch the organization together horizontally. And many times that is an afterthought and usually only comes to light after there are many issues that, say, 6 months, 9 months after a structure's been put in place, you feel the pain. And what a lot of that pain is caused by is that you haven't done the work laterally across. So I think when I attended this course, as I said, over a decade ago, that was a real eye-opener for me and really changed the way in which I did design within my organization. So I think while you'll learn a lot about what are the core structures, I think your eyes will really be open about how do you go about making sure that the organization is operating horizontally as effective as vertically.
And this is an element that has become more rather than less important as we've been designing very complex technologically enabled organizations, because we've actually created technologically the capability to connect anything, anytime, anywhere. But we haven't necessarily created the work processes and expectations and structures so that those connections actually occur, and they can occur well. So we'll be talking as well about that.
Totally agree, Sue.
Yep, and then we go to the management processes, and a lot of people enter this course and they say, I didn't even know that was part of design, because in fact the management processes have tended to be owned by functions and not seen as organization level kinds of phenomena. So we're going to talk a lot about what it means to design these explicitly so that they support where the strategy is taking you and where the work processes and structures have been set up so you can do the work to deliver value. Now you have to manage that. And there'll be probably some point at which somebody's going to ask the question, are you telling me that managing isn't a work process? And we're saying, no, that's not at all it. But managing is not the work process that delivers value to customers, and we often forget that the managers are making sure that the organization and the people are in place to do this, and making sure that there are goals and there is information and that decisions are made that allows the organization to go forward. But the people doing the work are the people carrying out the work processes that deliver the value to the customer. And so we have to say, do those pieces sing together? Is the way we manage this consistent with the work we have to do to deliver value? If we have to have very, very quick turnaround on something, and there are 9 management approval processes that are required to do that in the management process part of the organization, the people who are delivering that very quick turnaround system or product to a customer can't possibly meet their objectives because of the way the organization is managed. So we need to make sure that these two pieces fit together. And there's a set of diagnostic questions there, and you'll see that what we're going to really hone in on is how you set the direction and make sure people are aware of that and translate that into the goals and objectives, how you make decisions so that work can proceed relatively quickly and value can in fact be delivered, and people aren't sitting around waiting for the contending decisions in the organizations to get resolved. And then how do you make sure people have the information so you can actually empower them to do the work to deliver the value to their customers? That's the 3 major things that we'll talk about with respect to designing the management processes. And we advocate that these need to be, every time you change the structure and every time you change the strategy of the organization, you also have to change, at least make sure the management processes are able to be adapted to fit with the new structure and the new strategy, and to fit within the transformation that you're going through.
And I think, Sue, this is a really interesting part of the STAR, because I think within organizations we overlook, when you say direction setting, decision making, communication, you just make a natural assumption. Well, of course those things are going to happen, so we don't need to quote unquote interfere and make sure that they're in place. But I would say, again, this and the laterals are 2 key areas where I see a lot of turmoil after a restructure, any kind of change in your structure. Organizations are not real deliberate or disciplined about going back and retooling, or at least relooking at their direction, decision making, and communication. So we will dive deeper into this, and I think we'll talk about ways in which you can help the organization continue to evolve those practices after restructure, because just like laterals, I think sometimes it's an afterthought and an assumption that it's just going to naturally happen. No, you need to be deliberate and disciplined about making sure that you visit this point on the STAR.
Yeah. And you'll see in the diagnostic questions, the very last one is about learning, and you say, when I went through the 3 main processes, I didn't talk about learning. We are more and more starting to consider the learning processes as management processes. And this is especially being driven home in today's digital world, because we've got so many people in the organization who are actually getting out of step with the way work needs to be done and are almost becoming obsolete in their skills. and our traditional approaches to learning, which is figure out what the objectives are and put people in a classroom, don't even begin to scratch the surface of the learning that has to occur within the organization. So we will be talking about that as well, although less thoroughly than we will be talking about the other three. Okay, so then there is a star point. We call all these star points because Galbraith called his model a star, about rewards and performance management. And this is really the translation of the objectives and goals and the work logic, the work system logic, into goals and objectives for each unit and for each team and for each individual, so that what people are motivated to do and rewarded for doing is aligned with what the organization actually needs. And somewhere along the line, somebody's going to ask the question, why isn't that under people? That's where we have tended to put it in our traditional organizations. We've tended to give HR the responsibility for rewards, although, as we know, the executive team has a huge amount to say about that. And that's exactly why Jay put it where it is. He said, it is really a hybrid star point. It is a people process. Once you've decided the reward system and you have aligned it with the management, with the strategy, with the management processes, you've aligned it with the way organization is designed to work, so that if you have a group that's responsible for innovation and innovation implementation, you actually have their goals aligned with that and you reward them for that. Then it gets translated into how to get the people who can do that. How do you motivate people to do that? How do you make sure that people know that it's true, you are expected to innovate, and that is what you will be rewarded for, and this is how the reward system is set up, and this is the organization that the resources you have control over, and this is the lateral organization that you have to influence to get your job done. But in the end, you get rewarded for, is the innovation designed and is it put into place? It is a hybrid of the business processes and management processes and the people processes, which have tended to be motivation and retention and attraction driven. So we could motivate and attract people all we want, but if they don't get into an organization where they can use those skills and are rewarded for using them and getting results, then chances are we're going to continue to have the kind of turnover and loss of key talent that we have seen that is really becoming a huge problem in the digital world, where companies are competing for people with that digital knowledge. And is there any thing you would add to that, Beth?
No, I think you covered it. That's good.
Okay. And then we go to the people, and the people piece has become also much more complicated. But in the end, it really is the use of people practices to align the people's skills and capabilities and motivation with the jobs you are asking them to do, and to provide the experiences and the meaning to people that cause them to invest in and be committed to the outcomes of the organization. And we have, I think, tended to think of these as relatively mechanical processes, and we have looked a lot for what's best practice. And we will emphasize that the people piece of the organization needs to be every bit as dynamic as the organization designed for strategy and the work system. And that there really have to be principles and guidelines that determine the decisions that are made around people, and the systems have to be flexible enough to deal with the diversity, not only of people, which I think HR has really tried to start dealing with, although the success has been really, they've really struggled to do this, but also the diversity of work and the dynamic nature of work that we're asking people to do. And that, what the people in CEO in our research center who are studying performance management are finding is that the very nature of the performance management pieces of the organization, the very nature of the way jobs are defined is starting to change based on the changing configuration of an organization and today's dynamic and very digitally enabled kind of environment. So that's the model that we will share and talk about. And as Beth said, we will be going through it relatively linearly, but we will be looking at all those lines that connect all of this. And people ask us, is there a sort of an order of thinking through this? And what Jay and I used to say when we taught this course together is, yeah, there's a textbook order, but most of your organizations don't come in a textbook form, right? If you really had the freedom to do this, let's say you were setting up a new business and you had to design it from scratch, or an organization business unit was going through such a fundamental transition that the leaders of that organization really realized you had to reconfigure almost every element of the organization. And we're finding more and more that that's the case, although we're not necessarily finding leaders that have the patience for it. But if you're fortunate enough to be able to create that understanding in your leaders and to get their commitment to go through a systematic process, you would start at the top and go clockwise around this star with a lot of reiteration as you discovered the reality. So you get, oftentimes organizations go around that star, they get to the people part, and they say, we don't have the people who can make this organization work. And then you have to go back and say, well, how do we stage our transition to get there? And so you start doing some iterations to the rest of the star points too to make them fit with what you really can put in place. But if you were doing a textbook, you would really do it very systematic and go around the star. And we're going to be teaching it that way at the beginning, because what we're going to do is use design thinking. And design thinking you've probably run into in your marketing organizations, and you've run into in your product development organizations, your innovation organizations, where what they want to do is find a solution to something. That green circle in the center is the design. It could be a product. It could be a system to deliver value to, or a solution to deliver value to a customer. In the work we're going to talk about, the solution is the design. And it is a systemic design that has all the pieces of the star aligned with what you're trying to accomplish. And what we're going to try to teach is, first of all, the first principles that are at the bottom, which is what are the very core things you need to know about this star, about the organization design, and how it needs to be thought about in order to contribute to the business model and the strategy. What are the choices you have? What are the pros and cons of those choices? And how do you go about putting them together in a system that can deliver the value you want to deliver? And we call that first principles because they're pretty much the same depending upon and tailored to the particular kind of organization you're designing. But the principles stay the same. Are you going to Mars or are you going to New York City? The principles of how you design structures that can withstand the elements, of how you design materials that are efficient and effective and aren't going to get overheated, of how you do enough combustion to be able to get the thrust you need to get where you need to go, about how you design the IT so that it supports the way the system has to operate. Those stay the same, and we're going to talk about those, but we're going to talk about them with respect to the blue circles at the top, which is if you say what your business model is and what your capabilities are, then you know what the problem is you have to solve. Let's say you have a growth strategy that depends on innovation. We have to design an organization that prioritizes innovation and that links it to the business execution strategies required to actually commercialize the innovation. That's the problem. And then we will talk about criteria. What are the criteria to deliver a solution that can address that problem? What will be the criteria for an organization that is going to innovate and grow through innovation? And of course, part of the criteria have to be around the organization being able to rapidly innovate and rapidly test and iterate and rapidly commercialize. If you do that, then go into the center and say, what does that mean for what kind of core units we would need and how they would connect to our operating organization? what does that mean for the people skills we're going to need to be able to generate those innovations and generate the tests and the learning that are required to iterate them to a point where you have a solution and then can stabilize the operating organization around the solution. So this is design thinking, and it's design thinking, as I said, for products and for innovations. It is also design thinking for organizations which are equally, if not more complex systems. One of the things we'll talk a lot about is the complexity of designing an organization as compared to an airplane or a spaceship is that there are people who have their own goals and motivations and thoughts and ideas and capabilities that muck up the perfect design model. And so we have to include those people in what we're designing. You know, how do we get them to have the capabilities? How do we think about making the work meaningful for them and so forth, so that you're aligning the people with the technical design that you're coming up with. So that's the design thinking framework that we put in place and that we will be talking about. And
we have a question from Mohammed,
okay.
Thanking us for sharing the model to build org structure, but in most cases we're maintaining existing structure. So our challenge is how to improve the existing structure, and I'll give my perspective, and then Sue, you can chime in. I certainly don't want you to leave the webinar thinking that all we're going to talk about is restructuring or working every point of the star simultaneously, as Sue spoke to, because the reality, as she said, is you are never given a textbook situation. And so a lot of what you can think about the star is that if you are afforded the opportunity of doing a full restructure, then by all means we will be talking about how can you influence all points of the star. But we know, being inside organizations, that many times we have a structure, we know there are issues with it. You can use the star as a diagnostic tool to understand your organizational health. So for example, I used the STAR model with a finance function within the company I worked for. And what we did is we did a diagnosis on an existing structure, knowing that we couldn't change that structure. But what we diagnosed is using the STAR checklist, the questions, we uncovered where some of the pain points were. And in that particular case, it really fell around lateral and management processes. So what we were able to do is keep the existing structure, but really go in and do some surgical work around laterals and management to make that existing structure more effective. So we will be talking more about, you've got what you've got, how do you make it more effective?
Well, and I just put the Big STAR model back up because I think, Mohammed, what you're saying is that what you have is, in the red circle, you've got a core structure that your hypothesis is probably not going to get changed. It might be modified as best. But most organizations haven't defined their lateral structure. And the lateral, if you think about the structure of an organization as being the skeleton, and draw an analogy to the human body or any kind of a living system, the skeleton is the structure. But how does your body work? It works through the nervous system and the muscular system and the systemic elements, and how all the pieces get connected to each other. How does the brain get connected to your arm determines whether your arm actually and hand actually pick up the box that you've leaned over to pick up. And so the lateral really is the enabling of the core structure to work. And most organizations find that they have formalized the lateral. They have under-conceptualized the lateral. And then that the management processes tend to be divorced from the work that's actually done. And then that the rewards may be not aligned with what you want people to do, and that the people skills may not fit with what you're asking them to do, and the people motivations may not fit with what you're asking them to do. So that core structure has to be articulated. And even if you say, we don't have the ability to change that, because it's there, and we're going to design all the rest around it, you still have to, in the diagnostic, as Beth said, articulate it. Same thing with rewards. We get people who come in and say, our reward structure is given. We might as well not spend time on that. And, in fact, that may be true about how money is distributed and how pay grades are decided. But there's a huge amount of rewards that have to do with the way in which you link those systems to projects and to project outcomes, with the way in which you place people into work systems that either do or do not, give them a sense of actually accomplishing something, and the do or do not support them in accomplishing it so that they can accomplish their rewards. There's a huge amount of other pieces that need to support that reward structure, or that reward structure becomes a game that people play. And what we want is the reward structure to trigger all the rest of the star to operate effectively. So we're going to spend some time on the core structure, but the vast majority of the time is going to be spent with how do you align everything else with that and with the strategy. Does that help? Mohrman is probably not unmuted, but hopefully that helps. Beth is going to talk a little bit about how to get the most out of the workshop, and then we'll kind of look at other additional questions. We'll open it up for additional questions. Beth?
Good, yeah. So I attended this first course and on my own, and then the following, 6 months later, Sue, I came back with a group of 6 HR business partners, and then took the advanced course. So I've been very steeped in the material and now teaching it. I will tell you there is a lot of material. We cover, the days are jam-packed. You'll come away with frameworks, tools. You will come away with a great toolkit, essentially booklet, that you can apply some of those tools immediately after leaving the course. But some of the things that will help you digest all that content a little bit easier is to spend some time on that pre-work tool. That will get you deeper into each point on the star from a diagnostic perspective, and you'll be able to use it reflecting on your own case. So I would say it's very useful to have done some of that in advance. In advance also to read and reflect on the case studies that will be sent. They aren't extremely long. They're really helpful for you just to get a perspective outside of your organization. And in regarding to case studies, just be prepared that we will give you a little bit of homework in the evenings. Nothing arduous, nothing difficult. Usually it's just a case study to read in the evenings, but just wanted you to be prepared for that so it's not a surprise when you come in on day one. The last 2 points are really about you thinking about what you're going to do after the course. Like I said, there's so much content. What I'd like you to do is during the 3.5 days is to really pick out a piece of that content that you can readily take back and teach back in your organization. What I find is that there is so much material, and one of the best ways to really get it absorbed is to teach. The best way we know people learn is they learn it once, but then they take it back and teach it. So what I'd suggest is that you really start planning in advance about who you can share your learnings with back in your organization. So thinking about where you can apply them. So say by Wednesday, Thursday morning, at the latest Friday when we finish at noon, I'd really like you to think about, boy, I'd really like to take this section on lateral connections and get a group of my HR business partners together and do a lunch and learn with them. We can certainly help you frame that up. You will be served up a lot of content in the course that basically you can just lift and shift some of the slides and materials and tools. But one of the best ways to really start building your muscle around org design is taking what you learn in that week session and applying it as quickly as possible. So a couple things keep in mind. Soak on your pre-work. Do some of the reading of the case studies, and then start thinking about, even from the pre-work, it might start giving you an idea about, the management process is an area our organization doesn't spend a lot of time on. I'm going to really listen intently on that section during the course, and that's what I'm going to bring back. When I went back with the 6 HR business partners, and so if you're coming with a small group from your team, what I'd even suggest is in the evening or over lunch, you meet with your small company team during the week to start talking about how we're going to apply it back. When I brought the 6 business partners, we did one evening, we all went out to dinner during the week of the class, and we said, here's a couple areas that we want to take back. And we divided it up, and we did like a 90-minute session with the rest of our HR business partners, and each one of us took a section to teach. So just some food for thought before you come to the week.
And building on that, just so you have a sense of what the session's going to feel like, there is going to be a series of modules, and one of the three of us will be leading each of those modules, and there will be presentation of what those first principles that we talked about, the relevant first principles, lots of examples, discussion of cases. That's why it's so important to have read them, because the learning about the material comes out of the discussion of those cases. And then there'll be breaks, of course, and we'll give you some breaks. That's the good thing. And there'll be breakfast and lunches and stuff. And all three of us see ourselves as a resource during the whole session for you to come up and say, I'm thinking about this, and let me make sure I understand it, or this is the issue I face. Do you have any ideas? Have you ever seen anybody deal with that? And we're happy to sit down with you and just go through and talk about how you're responding to the material, and also sort of be a thought partner with you about how you might use it. And after the session, we're not going to leave you alone. You will be part of our community for organization design, and we hold several topical webinars and discussion sessions each year so that we can talk about what's new in org design, and we can make that available to people who've gone through the class. And then we do put our emails on all the materials, so we're really happy to have follow-up interactions about the concepts and the course material. Okay. Do you want to unmute us, Alice, in case people want to have any kind of comments?
Yes, everybody's been unmuted. Any questions?
We're getting an echo with Alice.
Oops, Alice, I think I need you on mute because we're getting echoes.
I'm unmuted.
Well, there's people in the Silicon Valley, they think that they can change the software and we can just adapt, but you know, we're here to prove that's not the case. Any comments?
I have a question. I guess we can work through the echoes.
Well, Alice, what can we do to un-echo?
Are you mute, Alice?
Yes, I'm muted.
I could type my question.
I am sorry. We actually did this on Monday, and this didn't happen. Huh. Okay, try again. Oh, no. It's that second too. Maybe say your question and we'll mute everybody when we answer it.
Okay, sounds good. My name is Dan. I work for the U.S. Treasury Department. And I wonder if you have any advice on what level of the organization to focus on for, like, the diagnostic in the worksheet that we're for the prep.
Good question. Okay. Alice, if you could mute everybody, then I'll try to answer that. Okay? All right. So the advice is whatever level you feel you're going to help to redesign, or you feel that you'll get a good systemic picture of how the organization works, if right now you don't have a particular design project or client in mind. So if you're coming and you're representing a part of the U.S. Treasury Department that deals with sort of the back office administrative kinds of functions of the Treasury Department, then I would take whatever that component is called in your organization and think about it as a system and how it connects with the rest of the organization, but how it needs to be organized in order to deliver the value that it needs to deliver to the rest of the Treasury Department. If you're dealing with a customer-focused, a public-facing function of the Treasury Department, or you're a reporting function of the Treasury Department, I would take that component and think about how it's organized to deliver value and connect with the rest of the Treasury Department or the public, and then look at how, whether it's organizing its resources in terms of the work processes, doing the structures, et cetera, in order to do that effectively. If you're dealing with the overall mission of the Treasury Department and whether you even have the right core units and differentiation of those to deliver on your business model or your strategy, then I would take the big picture, and then you'll end up with some pretty big units as the core units that you're looking at and how they need to connect with each other to deliver value. So pick the one that's going to be the most useful to you going back, and or that you feel will best clarify for you how to think about design in the Treasury Department.
And then Mohammed has a question. Do you have guidelines you can share with us in the course to evaluate the level of the org?
To evaluate the level of the org. I'm not sure I understand what level of the organization means in how you're using it, Mohammed.
To determine whether the organization, is it a division level or a group or a unit level?
And which one you're going to help design?
If you want to design a structure and you want to evaluate the functions for that organization, will make it as a division or will make it as a department?
Mm-hmm. What you're talking about really is the concept, the concept of the core units of the organization. So I don't know how, I suspect you're somewhat functionally designed.
Sometimes we're functionally, sometimes we're geographically. But,
right. You've got geographical regions, and then you've got functions that cut across those regions, because your service delivery cuts across all those regions, right? You have to have, it has to sing together. So you could go to the top and you could say, what are the core units that we need, and in order to carry out our strategy for growth and for service delivery. And then you could go into each one of those. I'm not talking about all in your pre-work. And you could pick one of those, though, and you could say, if the mission of this is X, Y, and Z, if this is the value it delivers, let's say it is, your Southeast Asia geography unit, and just say, what is a geography unit? What is its responsibility, accountability? What does it deliver in terms of value to the overarching ability of a fully integrated system in your company? Then you could take a geography unit and say, let's design what it needs to be around the star. And so at this point in time, if you're trying to decide what you're going to look at for your workbook, I think it depends on where you feel the most confident that an analysis is going to lead some value add, and also you feel the most confident that you have the information required to actually do the diagnostic for that unit. But my two decision points would be what's going to provide the most value to you in understanding your system, and the second, where are you most likely to be working or have a client who wants to design a piece of the system. If it's not going to be the full system, what piece of the system would be most useful to you in terms of where you see yourself moving forward?
Yeah, but I think you did not get to my question. Right? What I'm trying to ask is when you lead an organization and you have several functions, what is the information that you need to use to evaluate that functions, whether it will make it as a division or it will make it as a department or as a unit? Well, so I think, in order to do that, you need to have some information like the number of employees in the function, the value of the assets in that function, and then also you need to know the deliverables or the outcome of this function. So what I was looking for is, do you have like guideline principles or
we do not. We are not going to be providing a levels and numbers, accounts of employee kind of set of guidelines. We're going to be delivering a conceptual design framework for where do you need divisions and where do you need functions and how do they fit together. And then a second analysis would be, if you have a function, how do you design it? But we will not be dealing with the number of employees. We will not be dealing with counts of levels. That is really almost an efficiency analysis of the organization, and we won't be doing that. But we will be helping you with your question of when should something be a division, what do you mean by that, and then what other kinds of units are required to support those divisions. That's what we'll be dealing with.
And Sue, I hate to cut us off, but we are right at the top of the hour, and I want to be respectful of people's time.
Thank you, and we will be seeing you very shortly. We're looking forward to it. And if you have questions in advance, I think Alice can get them to us, or you already have our emails, and we'd be happy to respond. Sorry about the IT issues we just encountered. Okay. All right. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.